The final chord echoed like a gavel striking judgment. Silence, not awkward, not empty, but reverent, electric. Then one of the judges shot up from his seat, his voice breaking the hush. This, this is no amateur. Cameras swiveled like hawks, locking onto the stunned expression of a young contestant in a sequin dress. The same girl who'd mocked the plain woman's clothes, her hands, her quiet. Now her lips were parted, speechless, as if the sound had been ripped from her throat. In the center of it all stood the woman they had dismissed, hair tied back, sweater too old for this stage, her fingers still hovering above the keys like smoke. She didn't bask, she didn't bow, just a slow nod, eyes steady, as if she knew this silence was never theirs to grant. It had always belonged to the music. Then from the edge of the stage, a figure emerged, silver-haired, sharp-suited, his voice rolled like thunder across the stage. I trained her. Gasps rippled through the audience. Raymond Lockhart, the reclusive legend behind half of Hollywood's greatest scores. He looked at the judges, the audience, the ones who laughed. You didn't just underestimate a woman, he said, pausing. You disrespected the art. And just like that, everything shattered. But it hadn't started here. No. It started the moment she stepped onto that stage at Grand Talents, looking like she didn't belong. The moment she pushed open the glass doors of the Grand Talents auditorium, it was like stepping into another world, one stitched together with glitter, spotlight, and pride. The place pulsed with nerves and vanity, perfume thick in the air, heels clicking like drum rolls across the marble floor. Contestants were draped in gowns that shimmered with every move, suits tailored so sharp they could slice, lips glossed to perfection, hair curled like magazine covers come to life. And then there was her, sweatshirt faded at the sleeves, jeans she'd patched herself, sneakers scuffed from years of walking, not showing off. Her hair was pulled back in a tight, no-nonsense ponytail, not a drop of makeup on her face. The clipboard lady at the check-in table barely glanced up before asking if she was someone's assistant. She shook her head gently, sliding over her registration form, voice calm, steady. I'm here to perform. The woman raised an eyebrow but said nothing. She'd seen enough of these kinds, quiet, awkward, usually gone by round one. As she walked deeper into the hall, whispers trailed her like perfume. A girl with a rhinestone violin nudged her friend and said, just loud enough. She's here to tune the piano, followed by soft giggles and glances that cut sharper than words. The plain woman heard them all. She didn't flinch, didn't look back. She simply offered the clipboard lady a thank you, then asked politely, can I see the stage before my slot? No one stopped her. No one important noticed. Why would they? She wasn't loud, wasn't beautiful in the way the cameras liked. She didn't demand space. She took only what she needed. When she reached backstage, a technician asked if she was lost. She shook her head again, eyes fixed on the black grand piano that stood at the center of it all, like a throne waiting to be earned. Her fingers twitched, not from nerves but memory. And she stepped closer, close enough to see her reflection on the polished surface. Her eyes weren't soft. They weren't lost. They were waiting. She sat for a moment on the edge of the bench, not playing, just breathing. From behind the curtains, laughter rose, the kind that isn't loud but sharp, curled with sarcasm. One girl in designer boots whispered to another, let her have her little fantasy. They didn't know that this fantasy had once been a war zone, that each note she'd ever learned had been carved out of silence, that every callus on her fingers was a scar of persistence. Still, she didn't speak. She just ran one finger along the keys, not playing, just touching. And the sound that emerged was too clean, too exact, to ignore. A stagehand looked over, blinking. You a tech? She smiled, the kind of smile that didn't need defending. No, she said, I'm up next. And then she stood, walked to the wings and waited, not to prove anyone wrong, but to play what she knew, the only way she knew how. Quietly, fully, without apology. She chose the old rehearsal room near the back hallway, the one with paint peeling off the doorframe and a dusty curtain half drawn across the window. It didn't matter. She wasn't here for luxury. She was here for the piano, and it was good enough. The bench wobbled slightly when she sat. The A above middle C was sharp. Still, her hands moved with a quiet certainty, testing the weight of each key like a mechanic listening to the hum of an engine. The piece she chose wasn't meant to impress. It was meant to center her. Chopin's Prelude No. 4, a slow burn of grief and grace. She began to play, and the air shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, just shifted. It was in that moment that the first group arrived. 3 girls, all in pastel competition gowns and designer flats, floated into the room like they owned the air itself. One of them had her phone out before she even spotted the woman at the piano. "Oh my God, get this," she whispered, and they began streaming. "She's butchering the prelude already," another muttered, laughing, hand over her mouth like she was covering a sin. The camera zoomed in on the woman's hands, then her face, then her shoes. Cheap, worn, not photogenic. Comments rolled in. "What is this? Mom tries Carnegie Hall?" Giving background NPC energy. Did she wander in from the maintenance staff? She heard every word, but she didn't flinch. Her back stayed straight, her fingers steady, even as one of the girls stepped closer and said, "Hey, maybe try something simpler, like chopsticks." They laughed. She kept playing. She wasn't trying to impress them. She was talking to the music, and it was listening. Outside the room, footsteps clicked across the floor. One of the judges, Blake Hargrove, paused at the doorway. He was tall, sharp-jawed, every inch a brand. He frowned, tilting his head like someone trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. He watched her fingers glide over the keys, heard the restraint in her dynamics, the ache in each slow descent. But the image didn't match the sound. He narrowed his eyes, then walked on. No word, no nod, nothing. Just that look, like she was a smudge on the glass. More contestants arrived. A boy in a velvet blazer threw her a mocking thumbs up as he passed, saying, "That's brave, playing that slow. Hope the audience doesn't fall asleep." Another pair of teens with matching electric violins set up near the wall and began rehearsing something flashy, loud, drenched in speed and flair. Every time they crescendoed, they glanced her way, like daring her to match them. She didn't. She just repeated the same passage again and again, each time refining her touch, her timing, her breath. Someone turned up a speaker to drown her out. She adjusted her tempo. She played softer, not out of submission, out of skill. She made the silence work for her. She made them lean in. By now, the girls had stopped laughing. One of them furrowed her brow, watching the woman more closely. "Okay, but how is she still going?" she asked under her breath. The live stream ended. No one was commenting anymore. No one was laughing, not out loud at least. A janitor walked in to mop. He paused when he heard the music, then leaned against his cart, listening. One technician, arms crossed, watched her with a look that wasn't quite admiration, but wasn't mockery either. It was the look of someone who'd seen enough wannabes to know when someone meant it. But still, the taunts kept coming. As she exited to stretch her fingers, someone whispered, "Maybe she's some kind of pity case, like charity talent." Another, "She probably teaches preschool piano and thinks that qualifies her." Yet another, "Maybe she lost a bet." She didn't answer, not once, not to anyone. She returned to the bench, opened the lid again, retuned a string that was barely off. She did it without tools, just her ear and her fingers pressing lightly against the frame. The room had emptied a little. Rehearsals were being called for main stage now. But she stayed. She played again. This time, something different. A quiet improvisation in D minor, something only she knew. It was delicate but grounded, like roots twisting beneath the surface. For a moment, it felt like the walls themselves were listening. Then a staff member poked his head in. "Your practice time's up," he said. "Main hall's prepping." She nodded, stood, wiped down the keys with her sleeve, and gave the piano a last glance. No audience, no applause. But something had shifted. The air wasn't full of noise anymore. It was thick with questions. She walked out, slow and calm, as people brushed past her in silk and sequins. No one offered to hold the door. No one made room. She didn't need them to, because what they didn't realize was that every sneer, every laugh, every smug glance had only sharpened her focus. She wasn't here to be liked. She was here to play, and not even the weight of their judgment could press down hard enough to break. Backstage was buzzing with nerves and noise, vocal warm-ups, last-minute touch-ups, pages rustling, heels tapping. Amid the chaos, she found a small alcove beside the curtain where she could be alone with the piano again. It wasn't even her turn yet, but the instrument had always been her anchor, the one thing she didn't have to fight for attention from. She lifted the lid, tested a note, winced. One string was off. Just slightly. Enough to matter. She looked around, no tuner in sight, no techs available, so she rolled up her sleeve and did what she always did, fixed it herself. With her left hand steadying the frame, her right reached deep into the belly of the grand, fingers moving with practiced ease. Not just practical, specific, efficient. One of the stagehands, a lanky guy named Nate, who'd seen 100 divas fake their way through tuning, stopped mid-step when he caught the way she held the muting felt, the angle of her wrist, the way she tested the resonance with a light tap. He squinted. "Wait," he whispered to no one in particular. "That's a Lockhart method. Only a few people know it." He watched her just long enough to confirm it wasn't a fluke, then backed away slowly, like he'd just walked into a secret he wasn't meant to see. She didn't notice him. Or maybe she did, and just didn't care. She struck a chord, listened, then adjusted again, until the sound was clean, full, and exactly where she needed it. Then she sat, placed her fingers softly on the keys, and played. Not for practice, not for performance. Just one passage, a line from Chopin's Etude Opus. 25 number 7, known for its phrasing, its weight, its sorrow. Her fingers moved like wind through tall grass, brushing every note without rushing it. She pressed into the dissonance, didn't shy away from the pain, let it hang in the air just long enough to feel like truth. The notes didn't just fill the space, they cracked it open. A man walking past stopped cold. He wore a gray wool coat over his suit, glasses perched low on his nose, not flashy like the others. This was Jonathan Ames, a guest judge, musicologist, known for his brutal ear and encyclopedic memory. He leaned against the frame of the doorway, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. He didn't speak at first. He just listened, watched the shape of her hands, the control in her wrists, the way she pulled breath out of silence. After a minute, he muttered under his breath, "Where the hell did she learn that phrasing?" He tilted his head, studying the way she shaped the final cadence, how it hung like unfinished business. "That's not self-taught," he said, louder this time, to the coordinator beside him. "That's old-school European technique, conservatory grade, Berlin, or Paris maybe." The coordinator shrugged, flipping through the contestant list. She didn't put a training history, just listed a community college in Oregon. Ames looked at her again, this time with a different gaze. Less analytical, more searching. Down the hall, another tech came running, whispering something to Nate, the guy who saw the tuning. Nate shook his head, still stunned. "I'm telling you, that was Lockhart's style. I watched that man teach once. Only 5 people in the world tune like that. 2 are retired, 1's dead, and the other 3 are protégés." The tech scoffed. No way Lockhart trained her. Nate looked toward the stage where the woman had now shifted into another piece, Debussy this time. Then who the hell did? Inside the auditorium, the crowd was starting to fill. Contestants milled around, making last-minute checks. The flashy ones were rehearsing in their heads, twitching with anticipation, confidence turning into panic. But she was calm. Her body didn't twitch. Her breath didn't stutter. She sat in silence after finishing the piece, eyes closed for a moment, not meditating, just letting the music settle where it belonged. Ames walked away from the curtain, still muttering. Something doesn't add up. He pulled out his phone, typed in her contestant number, searched for any video footage, recordings, anything. Nothing. No YouTube clips, no training resumes, just silence. Ghost-level background. It didn't make sense, and that, in his world, was dangerous. Because if someone could play like that, and not be known, it meant one thing: she chose to be invisible. Backstage, the other contestants started whispering again, but this time, the tone had shifted. One girl who'd laughed earlier now bit her lip, watching the woman reset the bench height with exact precision. A guy in a velvet jacket leaned over to another and whispered, "You hear that, Debussy?" That wasn't beginner fingers. The other guy shrugged, trying to hold on to his swagger. Whatever. She probably practiced the same 2 pieces for 10 years. But the fear was there. It was spreading like static before a storm. And still, she said nothing. No brag, no glance, no attempt to prove anything. She just sat, still as a lake before. Her name was finally called. Contestant number 47. There wasn't a murmur of anticipation. No camera swiveled. No judge leaned forward. People shuffled in their seats, not out of excitement, but fatigue. It had been a long afternoon. The flashy acts had come and gone. The viral hopefuls had played their calculated crescendos. And now, a plain woman in a second-hand sweater was walking toward the piano like she didn't belong. No one said it, but everyone thought it. This would be filler, a palate cleanser before the final round. She adjusted the bench, quietly, checked the pedal, rolled her sleeves just a bit, then sat, placed her fingers on the keys, and paused. Not to stall, to breathe, to let the world fall away. Then she played. The first note hit like a whisper in a cathedral, perfectly weighted. The next one followed with the delicacy of breath itself. And suddenly, the air in the room tightened. You could feel it, like someone had dropped a pin on a frozen lake. The silence cracked. She played Chopin. Not the loud pieces, not the thunder, the slow ones, the ones that break you. No flash, no flare, just honesty. The kind of honesty people don't know how to look at, so they look away. Except no one did. They couldn't. A judge lowered his pen. A text stopped mid-scroll on his phone. A woman in the third row put a hand to her chest without realizing it. Every note was deliberate, not slow, not fast, human. Her left hand held down the grief, while her right hand reached for light. And when the melody turned to a minor variation, something shifted in the room. People started leaning forward, not in awe, in need, like they had just realized they were starving, and this was food. By the time she reached the modulation, the entire auditorium was still. Nobody coughed, nobody moved. And then, that one passage, the key change, the echo, the breath before the fall, she stretched it, not by speed, but by grace. She pulled the phrase like silk, and when it landed, it wasn't sound, it was confession. Someone in the back gasped, not loudly, just enough, as if they had been holding it for years. When the final chord came, it didn't crash. It settled, like dust on polished wood. And then, nothing, just the echo, just the stillness, and no one clapped, not yet, because no one remembered how. Then a single person stood, not a fan, not a friend, a judge, Jonathan Ames, the man who had muttered his doubts, who had leaned in backstage. He stood and nodded, slowly. The kind of nod you give when the ground under you shifts and you know you won't walk the same again. Then another stood, and another, until the room rose not in frenzy, but reverence. A standing ovation, not for show, but because sitting felt wrong. A girl who had mocked her earlier put her face in her hands, not in shame, in something deeper, like she had seen something that stripped the noise from her soul. And from the front row, a man stood, white-haired, crisp gray suit, eyes that had heard 1,000 performances and forgotten most of them. He walked to the stage with the quiet authority of someone who didn't need to explain himself. Raymond Lockhart. The crowd murmured. Phones came out, heads turned. He didn't look at the audience. He looked only at her. She hadn't moved. She was still at the bench, fingers folded in her lap, eyes lowered, no smile, no tears, just stillness. He climbed the steps, took the mic, and said 5 words. I trained her. In private. Gasps, then silence. He looked at the judges, then at the audience. You laughed, he said, not angry, just tired. You streamed, you snickered, you looked away because she didn't wear what you wear, because she didn't beg for your gaze. But you forgot something. The music never needed your permission. He turned to her again. She didn't come here to win. She came here to remind you why this stage exists. She finally looked up, not proud, not defiant, just ready. And in that moment, the stage belonged to her, not because she demanded it, because no one else was worthy of it. The ovation grew not in volume, but in weight. The applause wasn't fast or rhythmic. It was uneven, stunned, filled with something closer to awe than celebration. The people who had scrolled on their phones were now holding them still, forgetting to record. The contestants backstage stopped talking. Some leaned against the wall. Others sank into chairs. No one asked who she was anymore, they just watched. Lockhart turned to leave the stage, but not before one final line. "Sometimes," he said, turning to the audience, "we forget that art was never made for applause. It was made for truth. And tonight, you heard it, whether you deserved to or not." The woman finally rose. She didn't bow, she didn't wave, she just stepped off the stage like someone who had already left long ago. The silence followed her. It wasn't absence, it was respect, reverence, reality. She walked past the camera crews, the girls who had once mocked her, the judges who had once ignored her. Not a single head remained held high. She had burned the building down without raising her voice, and all that remained was a room full of people who realized, maybe too late, they had witnessed something pure. In a world obsessed with volume, she had whispered, and made them listen. As she exited the hall, the backstage corridor seemed quieter, not in sound but in weight. A staff member reached for her hand, unsure whether to congratulate her or just hold on to something real for a second longer. She gave a small nod. Another girl stood by the door, tears on her cheeks and makeup smeared. She didn't speak. She just stepped aside to let her pass, like someone yielding to a force they didn't understand, but now respected. Outside, it had begun to rain, soft and cold. She pulled up her hood and walked without hurry, blending into the street like she had never been there at all. But inside that building, the echoes of her music still lived, not as sound but as a bruise, a reminder. Back inside, conversation slowly resumed, but something had changed. The room was quieter now, more careful. Judges whispered to each other with their eyes instead of their mouths. Contestants stared at the keys of their instruments like seeing them for the first time. Even the stage crew moved more slowly, as if scared to disturb the air she had left behind. One of the younger contestants, no older than 12, turned to her mother and asked, "Will I ever be able to do that?" The mother didn't answer. She just pulled her daughter close and whispered, "Only if you remember why you started." Later that night, videos of her performance began to circulate, blurry at first, from backstage angles, shaky phones, and screen recordings. But it didn't matter. Even through pixelation, her playing cut through. No captions, no edits, just the truth in sound. People began sharing it not for clout, but with reverence. A tweet simply read, "I don't know who she is, but she just reminded me why I ever cared about music." And somewhere in a quiet part of the city, in a modest apartment lit by a single lamp, she sat alone with her hands folded, tea cooling beside her, watching the window fog and the rain. No celebration, no fireworks, just the deep, quiet satisfaction of having said what needed to be said, not in words, but in the only language that never lies. They waited near the hallway, just outside the main doors, as if the echo of her music might spill out and catch them off guard again. A few clutched their programs like shields, others kept their phones pointed down, not scrolling, just holding, like they didn't know what else to do with their hands. And then she appeared, slipping through the doorway without fanfare, head slightly bowed, sweater clinging to her shoulders like a quiet defiance. No entourage, no camera crew, just her. The same woman they had all dismissed hours earlier. One of the girls, the one who'd live-streamed her rehearsal, the one who had giggled with her friends, stepped forward, words tripping over each other in her mouth. "Hey, I just wanted to say..." But the rest didn't come out. She looked lost, like a child trying to speak in a language she hadn't learned yet. Another voice, male this time, firmer but no less shaken, filled the silence. "Excuse me, miss," he said, taking a cautious step forward. "What school did you go to? I mean, where did you learn to play like that?" She paused, looked at him, not with contempt, not with satisfaction, just presence. The kind that says, "I hear you, but I don't need to explain." Then she lowered her head slightly, a gesture so simple it felt sacred, and walked past them like a quiet tide reclaiming the shore. No answer, no smile, just motion. Like the question itself belonged to a world she no longer had to live in. The boy stood frozen, staring at the spot where she'd just been. Behind him, someone whispered, "Did you get that on video?" But no one moved, because even now, even in her absence, the room still felt full. Near the edge of the crowd, a teenage contestant stood clutching his violin case. He was thin, pale, his tuxedo too big on his frame, like he'd borrowed it from an older brother. His eyes were glassy, and he wiped them quickly with the back of his hand, hoping no one noticed. But his voice broke through anyway, low and unsure, but certain in its honesty. "I've been practicing scales for 6 months," he said, more to himself than anyone else. "But I've spent more time worrying about my look than my sound." He glanced at the door where she had disappeared. "From now on, I'm done with the posing. I just want to play like she did. I want it to matter." His teacher, a stern woman with tightly coiled hair and a clipboard always at her side, softened as she placed a hand on his shoulder. She didn't speak either, just nodded, the kind of nod that said, finally, "This boy understands music is about heart, not image," and that one performance had done more than years of lectures ever could. It cracked something open. Inside the auditorium, applause still lingered, not in waves, but in pulses, as if no one wanted to be the last to stop clapping. Some were still on their feet, not sure if they were honoring the music or the silence that followed it. It was the kind of applause that came not from excitement, but from recognition. The recognition of something they hadn't expected, something they hadn't earned but had been given anyway. A man in the balcony leaned over and said to no one in particular, "That wasn't a performance. That was a reckoning." Another replied, "I don't know her name, but I'll never forget her face." They were right. Her face wasn't beautiful by their standards. It wasn't made for the spotlight, but it had become unforgettable because of what it carried. Not vanity, not ambition, but truth. The kind of truth they didn't know they needed until it hit them like a wave. One of the judges scribbled something onto the corner of his score sheet, then tore it off and tucked it into his jacket. It wasn't a number. It was a name, or what he guessed might be hers. And one word, mastery. He didn't plan to score her. He planned to remember her. Backstage, someone played a note on the piano. Just one, soft and simple. But it rang strangely hollow now, like trying to talk after someone said the thing you'd been too afraid to speak aloud your whole life. The announcer finally stepped to the mic, clearing his throat. He smiled, but even he looked different, like a man who had witnessed something too sacred for his usual script. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "sometimes a moment arrives that reminds us why we came. Tonight, that moment had no name, but every one of you heard her. And just like that, the lights dimmed, but the room stayed bright. I didn't catch her name. None of us did, not officially. It wasn't printed on a banner. It wasn't followed by a sponsor. She didn't even glance at the camera when it passed her. She just walked in, sat down, and played like the world had never taught her to doubt herself. And maybe that was the miracle. Because that day, in a room full of ambition and sparkle, she showed us something we forgot to look for. She reminded us that music doesn't have a shape. It doesn't wear sequins. It doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't need the right lighting. It needs honesty. And she gave us that bare, brutal, beautiful honesty, without asking for a thing in return. I'm a judge. I've been one for 20 years. I've heard thousands of performances from students, from prodigies, from professionals. But this was different. It wasn't technical perfection, though it came close. It wasn't showmanship, though she held the room like a storm. It was truth, and it cut through the noise, the ego, the branding, the algorithms. It made us all sit up straighter and shut up for once. I saw people cry who hadn't cried in years. I saw kids walk out quieter than they came in. I saw arrogance fold in on itself. That's what she did. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't strike a pose. She played. And in doing so, she reminded us that the stage is not about who shines. It's about who means it. And she meant it. Every note, every breath, every silence. I don't know where she came from. I don't know where she went. But I know this. That performance will outlive all the names we thought mattered. It will echo in rehearsal rooms, in memory, in the pause before a young musician plays their first note. It will live in the way we look twice at the quiet ones. It will whisper through music schools and live on in the hands of students who were listening. So, let me ask you something. You, reading this, hearing this, have you ever judged someone too quickly just because they looked ordinary,